Okay, let's see if we got this on. Excellent connection, it says. Okay, looks like we're online. Cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live read live stream of Edgar Allan Poe's The Mask of the Red Death. Now, like I said in my post, Edgar Allan Poe was one of the most influential poets and story writers of all time. So I figured it'd be fun to do, to do a live read of one of his stories. And since it's in the public domain, I think, you know, it's a great candidate. Oh, that was my phone. Let me set it to silent. And for that matter, let me find a thing to charge my phone with, because it's like at 30% right now. Just give me a second. I promise not to be long. And he's back. Come on, where is it? Oh, sorry, a friend of mine is. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it's. Yeah, I want to keep my personal life personal at the moment. Uh, anyway, so yeah. Oh, totally forgot. I was gonna look for the story on my phone. That way, I won't have to like use my computer at the same time. That way, uh, less man, what's it called? CPU. I'll use less CPU that way if I use a separate device. Okay, so if I can just. Oh, right. Mask. Yep, short story by Edgar Allan Poe. And if this ends up being a little too short, maybe I'll read another one, as a bonus. But with that being said, I don't really know. I haven't really decided what other one to read. I mean, there are a lot of great stories out there. There are things like The Raven, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Black Cat. That's a very gruesome one. So I'm just gonna wait for those of you who are reading this pre-recorded. You might want to fast forward a little when some viewers show up. We'll give it until around the 10-minute mark, I'd say, maybe the 7-minute mark, but around that time I'll start reading the story. But here, while we're waiting, how about we just look up some stuff about Edgar Allan Poe? Interesting facts about Edgar Allan Poe.
According to Wikipedia,
Here we go. 3 odd facts about Edgar Allan Poe. Let's see. Number 1, he was a literary trailblazer. Poe is best remembered for his tales of terror and haunting poems, but he is also credited as one of the earliest writers of short stories, the inventor of the modern detective story, and an innovator in the genre of science fiction. Number 2, he was prolific. His works include short stories, poetry, a novel, a textbook, a book of scientific theory, and numerous essays and book reviews. I didn't know he made book reviews. That's cool. Number 3, he created a new profession. Poe is considered America's first well known professional writer, and thus starving artist. He eked out his living as the country's first great literary critic and theoretician. Okay, number 4, he was likely named after a Shakespearean character. He was born Edgar Poe in Boston in 1809. His parents were both actors. His parents were performing in Shakespeare's King Lear the year he was born, leading to speculation that he was named for the play's Earl of Gloucester's son, Edgar. Number 5. Poetry and the pen ran in the Poe family. Poe was the middle child of 3. His brother, William Henry Leonard Poe, was also a poet. His sister, Rosalie Poe, was a teacher of penmanship. Number 6. He was an orphan. Before Edgar reached the age of 4, his parents died and he was taken in by a wealthy merchant named John Allan and his wife, Frances. They lived in Richmond, Virginia, and christened the boy with the name Edgar Allan Poe. Number 7. He emulated Lord Byron. Poe's foster father groomed him to go into business and become a Virginia gentleman, but Poe dreamt of being a writer like his boyhood hero, the British poet Lord Byron. By the time he was 13, Poe had written enough poetry for a book, even though his headmaster convinced Poe's father not to allow its publication. Number 8. Poverty was his muse. Poe started on a college career, but with little financial support from the I'm going to start over again. Poe started on a college career, but with little financial support from the miserly Allan, Poe embarked on a long journey of poverty and debt. Money problems haunted him, and tensions with his foster father prompted him into determination to become a successful writer. Number 9. He was a prodigy. He published his first book, Tamerlane, when he was 18. Number 10. He was disinherited. When Allan died, Poe was living in poverty, but he was left out of the will, which nonetheless provided for an illegitimate child who Allan hadn't even ever met. Ouch. Number 11. Oh my God, he married his teen cousin. He married his first cousin, Virginia Clem, when she was 13 and he was 27. And in parentheses right here it says, okay, so maybe that's a bit odd by today's standards. She died at the age of 24 from tuberculosis. Number 12. He may have invented the art of snarky. Oh, you don't say. Poe acquired an editorial position at the soon-to-become popular Southern Literary Messenger magazine, where he became famous for his scathing book reviews and scorching critiques, which is where Griswold's ire was born. He went on to write for many magazines. The 1845 publication of The Raven made him a household name and finally secured him the success he had been seeking. Number 13. His death was as enigmatic as his work. In 1849, Poe went missing for 5 days and was found worse for the wear and delirious in Baltimore. He was taken to the hospital, where he died soon after at the age of 40. No autopsy was performed. The cause of death was listed as a vague congestion of the brain, and he was buried 2 days later. Experts and scholars have proposed everything from murder and rabies to dipsomania and carbon monoxide poisoning as the reason for his demise. But to this day, the cause of Edgar Allan Poe's death remains a mystery. Hey, Sam Kirby. You just caught me reading like a 13 odd facts about Edgar Allan Poe. I figured, I'd read this list to, kind of a warm-up, So, yeah, you arrived at a very appropriate time. So, yeah, yeah, they are cool facts. By the way, did you just hear some weird background noise just now? Just curious. Okay, good, because there's some crazy winds going on outside right now. I mean, crazy. Like it's rattling my window. It's trying to push out my window plug, which is the thing that's supposed to reduce the amount of noise coming into the room. So it really says something when the winds are that strong that it makes the thing come out like it's trying to collapse on top of me. But I digress. Anyway, let's talk about a story about a plague. I figured this story was kind of appropriate given, the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it'd be fun to read a story about, this fictional disease known as the Red Death. Where are the tissues? Hang on a sec. Oh, stupid. They were on my bed. So, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone else who's watching this, let's dive headfirst into the short story The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusions of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his thousands of friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. These were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber in which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet, The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon the carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the seven apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanated from lamp or candle within the suite of the chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire, that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. I need a drink. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. A light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and mediation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. and these, the dreams, writhed in about taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps, and anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff, frozen, as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from near the clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which rests their ears, who indulged in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the mediations of the thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise, and then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around, but the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was bespeckled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its rôle, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom We have to hang at sunrise from the battlements. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang they rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber, to the purple, through the purple, to the green, through the green, to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement and had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the threatening figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask, which they handed with so violent and rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and each died in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. And that was The Mask of the Red Death. So yeah, that was pretty creepy. I mean, yeah, it uses a lot of old-fashioned vocabulary, but it was a thing of the times. So I understand, like maybe not everyone would be able to get it at first, but oh man, why am I stuttering? Why am I stuttering right now? I was just looking at the playback. Ignore that. But as I was saying, basically, so they all had a party, and they thought they were all safe inside, but now the stranger came in and freaked everybody out. The prince who was running the whole thing was very angry at the stranger and he demanded that the stranger be apprehended, but people were too afraid of it, and then the stranger kept walking toward the prince. The prince was running away, eventually stopping at the black room with the red light, and he was about to stab the stranger, but he fell ill because of the Red Death itself. And when people finally grabbed hold onto the stranger, there was no one underneath but the Red Death itself. So somehow this disease took on a metaphysical form and infected everybody in the castle. And I guess the entire world died. The end. So, keep in mind, this is a fictional disease. Yeah, yeah, it was very morbid and really cool. I, so, say what you will about COVID-19, at least we didn't have to deal with this. I mean, yeah, we've been enduring a pandemic for quite some time right now, but on the other hand, the coronavirus doesn't go around stalking in a very scary outfit, terrorizing people, and then, killing them like that. So I guess the Red Death is some kind of a magic form. There actually is a movie called The Mask of the Red Death, and it's based off of the story, but it expands upon a few things. I myself haven't seen the movie, but what I do know about it is that it stars legendary film actor Vincent Price. He's known for being in a lot of horror movies, and he has a very iconic voice and a very iconic presence. If you saw him, you'd probably recognize him, or maybe you'd recognize his voice, something like that. He's The point is he's a horror icon, and he was in a movie adaptation of Mask of the Red Death. I read a plot summary once, but that was like at least a decade ago. I don't really remember what happened. I was going to read this other story that was not by Edgar Allan Poe called The Yellow Wallpaper, but to make sure that it was a worthwhile story for me to read out loud, I listened to an audiobook of it, and it didn't end. It was honestly kind of boring to me. Like, it took forever to get going. Like, the interesting stuff didn't happen until like the halfway mark. And yeah, I just wasn't sure if it would make a good read. But, with the descriptions that were in this story, like all these rooms that had all these different colors, I mean, here, here, hang on, I'm trying to demonstrate something, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. How should I do this? Just give me a minute. I'm trying to set something up. Sorry, that was a squeak. Okay, so now we're looking. That is a blanket over my wall over there. And here, I'm going to try something, so just bear with me for a second. Uh, so, first things first, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now, keep in mind, it's going to be a digital zoom, so it's not going to offer the most clean image quality. But just bear with me for a second. So, configure video, and there we go, zoom. So, oh, that's the closest it can zoom. That's too bad. You know what? I have a better idea. Here, I'm just going to mute this so you won't have to listen to that squeak again. On second thought, I don't think I need a black background to pull off the effect that I'm trying to pull off what I'm trying to pull off. So just bear with me for a second. It's still kind of crooked. What the heck? Mm. Well, it's certainly better. But anyway, so first things first, I'm going to turn on the overhead lights. And second thing, I'm going to turn off the ring light. Now, I know it's not very well lit right now, but there's actually a point to this, so again, bear with me. As some of you know, I have overhead lights that can change color by the press of a button on the app on my phone. So, behold. Ooh, it's a little hard to see, isn't it? Is there a way to... Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, that is freaky. Here, I'm gonna see if I can increase the brightness a little bit. Come on, configure video. Okay. No. Okay, yeah, that's... Oh, wow, that is creepy as hell. Okay, so hang on, just bear with me for a second. No, I said okay. Okay. Now, this is probably what the room looked like in the story. And I don't know about you, but it looks really creepy in my opinion. Look, you could barely see the detail on my face. But like the story said, there are multiple rooms. Yeah, it is very creepy, but there are multiple rooms. They said that, I believe they said there was an orange room as well, though it might be kind of hard to tell right now. Here, I'm going to go to my preview on here. Well, I mean, it looks kind of orange, but not really. Now, it still looks pretty red. Some of it is kind of hard to pull off here and there. I'm just going to go through the colors of the rainbow, I guess you could say. So basically, a lot of the rooms in the story kind of looked like this. And I guess the yellow would, kind of make it look the more normal of the bunch. But yeah, like, imagine the entire room was covered in black and everything inside it was illuminated red. That's basically what the final room looked like. The one with the grandfather clock and all that. In hindsight, maybe I should have read it like this, but I don't know. It probably would have been... I figured, this be kind of cool to focus on. But you know what's funny about this? Apparently, this is the best kind of light to sleep with. And, I mean, not just the light alone. Apparently, you're also supposed to be listening to this thing called pink noise. And pink noise is basically a form of like a static or a static sounding noise, kind of a hiss sort of thing. And apparently, the combination of this light with the pink noise, it's supposed to help people fall asleep and to sort of show off what a pink noise sounds like. Yeah, it's like white noise, but it's a different frequency. And this is what it sounds like. It does not sound like a food commercial. I apologize. Okay, so here we go. I mean, obviously you have the volume on low, you know, so it's a bit more peaceful. So you just have it. Okay, that is very strange. I feel oddly relaxed. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still think how it looks on the camera right now is, still looks kind of weird, but still. Let's just say I wouldn't be making out with anyone in a room like this anytime soon. Unless I want to give my date nightmares for some reason. However, this kind of music is probably what you probably don't want to hear in a room like this. So yeah, that was a song from the original soundtrack of Silent Hill called My Heaven. An ironic name, I know, but Silent Hill is a survival horror game, and and that song plays during like the final boss fight. And you want to know what's insane about that song? That little like screaming sound that you hear, that that's the sound of a dentist drill being distorted. That's how they were able to accomplish the effect. Silent Hill is a good game, by the way. Oh, I, I don't want to leave everyone in the dark, literally. So I'm gonna switch everything back. Now, obviously, I gotta go into settings and set a few things back, not just the lights. Uh, these include putting the contrast back to normal. Anything else? No, that's pretty much it. Although I could just do this. Wait, hold on. There we go. Now the red lights are still on, but the red lights are still on, but the brightness of the ring light is kind of overpowering that. Hang on, I'm gonna. For some reason, the ring light isn't secure. Oh, I see. That's where you secure it. Okay. Now then. A common thing that you see in horror movies and even horror games these days is that a lot of them tend to focus on, like, insanely intense violins, like, and, it builds up to something intense. But I watched this video from a guy called Nitro Rad. He did a review of the original Silent Hill. And he brought up the fact that what made, My Heaven so insanely scary of a song was that it wasn't, made with like instruments in the regular kind of way. It was just made with a bunch of very intense noises, including that dentist drill. And that's what makes it so uneasy. Like, I read some of the comments and it said that the song was something like, it's like the song is a representation of something that shouldn't exist in this world. And I don't know how, but if I were to make a like some kind of a horror project, I definitely want a song like that inside of that, story or whatever. Like if it were adapted to screen or in a game. You know, not like, insanely harmonic and beautiful, but just, intense, chaotic noises that somehow create a kind of panic, like some kind of a panic induced inside the listener. I feel like, this stream might be a little short, so how about I just read one more Edgar Allan Poe thing and then we can call it a night? Because I have something planned for tomorrow, something that isn't good. You'll see. You'll see. Is that okay? Okay. So, how about we get to Edgar Allan Poe's most known bit of work, The Raven? The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, wake and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow from the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. and the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating my entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened the wide door." Oh, wait. "That scarce I was sure I heard you. Here I opened the wide door. Darkness, there and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was broken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore!" Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what the thread is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and a flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled at this ungainly fowl, to hear discoursely so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore!" Suddenly at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken. "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirge of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grimly, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplights gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight glaring o'er she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch! I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. Whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert island enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, I said, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, with the distant Aidenn, and shall clasp us a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, who the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back to the tempest, and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black pume, as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak out from my heart, and take thy form from my door. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from that shadow lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore. As I was searching for that story, it said that there was a film based off of The Raven. I might have to look into that because, again, with it being a poem and, relatively short as well, maybe it's something similar to how that Mask of the Red Death movie was made. Like, maybe it expands upon a few things, and, like, there's a reason why that raven is there. Like, there's some deep themes are probably pretty relevant in that story, and I think it has to do with like grief and closure. But yeah, I mean, I'm no literary scholar or whatever, but that's just my guess. But yeah, this was a pretty good live stream, but I'm a little unsettled now, and I'm gonna go watch something to make me laugh. So again, thank you everyone who attended this live stream. It was a lot of fun, and I'll see you tomorrow. Don't worry, I've got something planned for tomorrow too. So I'll see you all later, okay? See you, Zam Kirby.